This is Dan Bolen, and I'm the host of the podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous, where people come from all over the world to talk about their fear and how they've used courage to get through their fear. And I think this is such an important topic for us to consider because all of us, whether we're heterosexual allies or part of the LGBT community, we all have fear. We all have fear. And we need courage to get through the fear. And normally, if we don't get through the fear and use courage to do that, many times we will find ourselves addicting to something. And I talked about that in my podcast on the Daily Blast. And you can check that out on YouTube, the Daily Blast Live, Dan Bolen, and that'll give you a little bit more information about how we do that. But this is a program for everyone. As I mentioned, it leans itself a little bit to the LGBT community, but it's also allies of the heterosexual allies that we also appeal to as well. In fact, half of the comments that I get on my website, on my book, which I wrote, The Courage to Be Courageous, are from heterosexual allies who've used courage to get through their fear in their life. So I think it's very helpful for all of us. I think we're going to have a fascinating guest today, someone that actually contacted me after she saw the Daily Blast Live. Her name is Faythe Huston, and I was so intrigued by her email that I called her and we talked, and I think she has a fascinating and very, I think, inspiring story. I'm going to start off by saying Faythe was a 70-year-old virgin. How in the hell did that happen? and Faythe is going to tell us about that. And I think that's a good way to start the podcast. But before we do, Faythe, welcome to my podcast. It's a pleasure having you.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And I enjoyed seeing your interview on Daily Blast Live. And your book is arriving today, by the way.
Oh, well,
so
thank you.
I look forward to reading it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
well,
thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind. Now let's talk a little bit about, I want to talk a little bit about the hero journey with Faythe. This is, I thought, a very interesting concept she talked about. But let's talk about her education, her family upbringing, why she was not able to consider or have sex before she was 70. So, Faythe, tell us a little bit about that and how that all transpired.
Well, how many hours do you have? So I was raised in a very conservative family, church, and society. My education is I have a master's in counseling and I have a master's in spiritual direction. The dictates of the church were that it was a very conservative church, that you don't have sex or intimacy until you're married. So those who never get married, which I never did, are kind of out of luck if you're going to follow that. And I followed into my adulthood, into the church. I'm not part of a church now, but it stays with you for a very long time.
Yes.
And then in my family, that was also, being in the church, sex was never talked about. Body parts were never talked about. Intimacy was not talked about. And then in our society, American society, I think is very closed to really having a healthy attitude about sex. So that was never presented either. And in school, I don't think we ever had sex education. So while I did have some relationships with men, I'm heterosexual. While I did have some relationships with men along the way, they were never intimate. And so I don't want to get too far ahead of where you want to go.
No, but I want to think about that for a second, too, because you were part of that community, conservative, and it taught you to be the way you were at the time. Why didn't you step out of that and say, you know what, I would like to get to know a man, I would like to date and have intimacy with him? I'm sure the thought came across your mind. How did you deal with that at the time?
Yeah, so as I said, I did have some relationships. I had the whole second year of college, I dated a guy there at college. But because it was a Christian college, you had to limit your intimacy. And that just wasn't going to happen. So that was the overriding dictate there. Later on, I think part of it too was, and I don't want to go too far into the family history, but there were some things there that maybe I didn't have role models that would have shown me how to interact with a man. One of the things growing up, we weren't allowed to dance. Well, as a child in gym class, I don't know now, but you learned there was square dancing, but we weren't allowed to do that. Well, that, as I reflect back, is a social interaction with the opposite sex. And I didn't have that. So there were a lot of those kind of things that I just felt like guys aren't interested in me, or they're not going to be, if they are interested in me, they're not going to like my body. Of course, now, I wish I had the body I had 50 years ago.
Don't we all?
Great. Don't we all?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of just piling on of different things that said, maybe being in a relationship is not as safe as I would like.
Mm-hmm. And I think all of that kind of puts you into a certain place, because of your conservative background, your parents not talking about sex or intimacy, a Christian college, but you had dated, as you mentioned, but there was no sexual intimacy.
Correct.
So we're going to talk a little bit more because, as I said, Faythe came out as a virgin at 70. She's now 72, and she's not a virgin. Would that be a correct statement?
That's a very correct statement. Yes.
Tell me how you came to this point, and it was kind of an epiphany for you, where you thought tell us how that happened, because you finally decided that you wanted to have intimacy with a man. How did that occur?
Yeah. So, and just reference to the hero journey, I have used that paradigm in my life to look at, and you can look at the hero journey in any movie, of overcoming something. But basically, there's three parts to the hero journey. There's a call to adventure. We all have that, whether we answer it or not. There's a call to adventure. If we answer that, then we're going on the journey. And then there's the return. So it makes a circle, a complete circle. There's a lot of pieces in that hero journey. I'm not going to go into all of them. You can look it up online. But so about 3 years ago, there was kind of a call to adventure, and it came out of nowhere. I think that it was my unconscious saying, it is time for you to look at your sexual life. We have our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, and our sexual health. But very few people talk about that. And I think it was my unconscious saying, now is the time. I thought, what? And so it kind of came out of nowhere. And for the next 6 months, it's just stayed with me, this energy. And I read and I watched videos, and I, anything I could read online, it just kind of understanding. And then one day, several months into this, I was reading an article. I don't remember what the article was about, but there was a link. There's always a link in an article to something else. There was a link to Surrogate Partner Therapy. Surrogate Partner Therapy, SPT. I thought, what the heck is that? I clicked on the link, I read about it, and I thought, no way would I ever do that. So that is kind of what, it wasn't like all of a sudden I decided I'm going to go have sex. Mm-hmm. And, I think a lot of people would say, well, why didn't you just go and get in a relationship? Easier said than done. Why didn't you, you could go to a bar and pick up some guy and have a night together. But I decided if this is going to be the first time I have sex, it is going to be with somebody who knows what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into this, that I hired a professional.
And so you had a lot of fear when you read this article and thought, no way in hell am I going to do this. So that was fear. How did you get the courage to overcome that fear? Tell us about that, Faythe.
As I look back on it, I think in the hero journey, when you start to answer the call to adventure, that energy grabs a hold of you. You don't have the energy has you, and it's just pulling you along. And I wanted to know more and more. And I am a seeker. And when I want to know something, I will research it till I have the answer I want or the answers I want. So that's why I was reading all these articles and you know, I wanted pleasure in my life. And if I could just reference one of the first books I read was The Pleasure is All Yours by Dr. Rachel Allen, Allyn. The pleasure is all yours. And it's not just about sexual pleasure. It's pleasure in all parts of our life. And I thought, I'm turning 70. This is going to be the decade, not the year, but the decade of pleasure. I'm going to find pleasure.
Wow. So are you saying pleasure with your body?
Every aspect, every aspect that we can find pleasure. Pleasure was not a word that I heard much when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. In the church, I never heard a sermon on pleasure. Mm-hmm. No, pleasure is hedonistic. It's self-centered. It's, something that we really shouldn't be talking about. But I decided, no, it's a very good thing. It's a very good thing. Pleasure is our birthright. That's in pleasure. The pleasure is all yours. She said, pleasure is your birthright.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I agree with that. So tell me the steps that you took to get into surrogate partner therapy.
Okay. So, it'd been about 6 months. I'd been in this kind of journey, and I really needed to talk to somebody. But I'd done a lot of therapy over the decades. I wasn't in therapy at the time, but I read this article. I thought, what the heck is this? No one would ever do this. So surrogate partner therapy, let me just explain it didactically. It's a client, that would be me, it's a sex therapist, and it's a surrogate partner. And it's a therapeutic relationship. Everyone's talking to everyone. And so typically, a client is seeing a sex therapist. And in that process, the sex therapist might say, seeing a surrogate might be really helpful for you. And if the client agrees, then the surrogate is pulled in. I went the back door. I found the surrogate first, and then I had to find the therapist. But surrogate partner therapy is for people who, many reasons. One, like myself, have little or no sexual experience, have had sexual trauma or sexual abuse or emotional abuse, physical abuse, who have body image problems, who don't accept their body, who have pain with sex or some kind of dysfunction, are not orgasmic. I mean, the list goes on that this could be helpful for. So, of course, my eyeballs fixed on little or no sex. So I thought, okay, well, I still wasn't ready to do it, but I was also looking a lot at Tantra energy. And I thought, I want to find a Tantra massage therapist. So I started asking around. I was going to physical therapists at the time. And she said, well, I know of somebody who's in Tantra. Anyway, I got the name of this person. And it turned out that this person was the surrogate. This person ended up being the surrogate.
Interesting.
Now, and I had my first conversation on Zoom with him January of 2021, I believe. And I got off that call, that's just an informational call. I got off that call and I was racing around my kitchen going, hell no, I can't do this. And yet somewhere inside it said, guess what? You're going to be doing this. It took another 6 months for it to get all put together, and a lot of questions, a lot of asking, a lot of, doubt, a lot of fear. I said, I don't want to hurt when this is over because it's likely we're going to fall in love. And he said, and every relationship ends. Every relationship ends.
That's true.
Whether it's death or divorce or breakup or your dog dies or whatever. So I really had to work through that. And I had a lot of hesitations, which we can get into in a minute if you'd like. I just gave you a very long answer to something.
No, you're doing fine. I want to ask you that. So 6 months you waited to contact him. So was there one event or was it a process that gave you courage? because you knew you wanted it. You kind of were fighting with yourself over it, but then somehow you took the step to do that. Was there any event that caused you to do that?
I don't know that there was one particular event. So from the time this energy came up, it was 6 months before I even knew about him. And then it was about another 6 months once I talked to him that we actually met for the first time. And during that time, I was still reading a lot. I had to find a therapist. That took a while. That's a whole nother story. I had a lot of hesitations I had to work through, schedules that I had to work through. And when I spoke to him the first time on the phone, he said, well, if you'd like to work just on sexological body work, I can give you a name of some females. So I did see one of the females, a female body worker for 2 sessions. And that was a very good intro. It wasn't sex, but it was about understanding my body, sensing my body, feeling my body.
Feeling your body,
so that
right.
was very helpful. Then after those 2 sessions, I decided, I think I really need to work with male energy. As a heterosexual woman, I need to work with male energy. Now, let me say that surrogate partner therapy does not always involve intercourse, but I knew I wanted that. So it doesn't have to involve intercourse, but other sensate experiences. So any particular event, I think it was seeing that female sexological body worker and then deciding, yes, I'm going to go ahead with this. I'm going to do it. It was, it's expensive, but I decided this is what I want to experience before I die. And as I said before, I didn't want to just go out and find some guy to have sex with. If I ask people, tell me about your first sexual experience, a lot of people would say, it wasn't so great. It wasn't so great. I knew I wanted my first experience to be with someone who knew what they were doing and felt safe. Safety was a big thing. Yeah. So.
And that took a lot of courage for you to be able to do that, too. And when you working with a surrogate partner, you get to know each other for a period of time, and then you have conversation. There's touching involved, and maybe even cuddling involved. And so then there gets the time. I think you saw him for about a year.
It was about over a year and a half, but because of schedules and stuff, I would say probably about a year, actually, of seeing him. And I would say, if I could just say, that in surrogate partner therapy, there's 4 pillars, 4 parts of it. The first is the grounding. So initially, we would just sit on the couch. He had a studio with a bed and sitting area. We'd sit on the couch and talk and just get to know each other, and then move to maybe sensate touch. And then some other experiences. One of the experiences early on was there was a full-length mirror, standing in front of the mirror, taking your clothes off and talking about your body. Both of us did that. Massage, things like that. I remember, maybe I'll cry when I say this, but I remember the first time I met him in his studio, and we were sitting on the couch, and in my line of vision, I could see the bed. And I thought to myself, I can see the Holy Grail.
Oh, wow.
I can see the Emerald City, and it is mine. I deserve this. I deserve it. And I was scared to death. But that's part of the hero journey, is saying, I can go forward with this, even though I'm scared to death. So it was a long process.
And I think what you did is you confronted the fear. I'm scared to death, which is fear, but I have the courage. I'm going to do it anyway. And the courage was stronger than the fear, too. So how was that experience there? Because I know you get attached to somebody because you get to know them emotionally, obviously, probably somewhat spiritually, physically, obviously. So talk us about conscious uncoupling, because that was a part of the process that he told you about before you started. Give us some information on that, Faythe.
Yeah. So, and to finish those 4 pillars, there's the grounding.
Okay.
The second is arousal and nudity and genital touch. The third is intercourse. And the fourth is closure or conscious uncoupling. So I knew from the very beginning it was going to end. Okay. And the ending comes when all parties feel like the client has learned what they want to learn. And so then I still see the therapist, but I don't see the surrogate at this point. It just ended in January. Well, 3 months ago. Yeah, 3 months ago, I guess. But before I get to that part, the conscious uncoupling, I would just like to share what my hesitations were in doing this. And one of them was, am I going to be enough? Is my body going to be enough? It's, too bad it's not 50 years ago when I was more flexible and whatever. Will I be disappointed in my body? What if my body does not respond? And if I could interject here a book, I have it right here. It's called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. And it's a great book for body image. And I found a lot of help in that. Other hesitations, what if my friends and family find out? And there's very few that know, even to today, what I did for the last 2 years. So there was that fear. There was, why am I doing this at this age? Why do I need to do this at this age? No big deal. And I realized you're never too old. It's never too late to do anything. And of course, I didn't want to hurt when it was over. Right when I started working with this surrogate, the movie Good Luck to You, Leo Grand came out with Emma Thompson, who was an older woman seeking pleasure. Anyone who hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it.
I saw it. It was a fantastic movie. Yes. Great movie.
Good Luck to You, Leo Grand. Now, this was filmed in England. That's not the program I did, but her whole goal was to experience pleasure in her body that she had not, even though she'd been married for many, many years until her husband died. So I also had some goals that I wrote down before I started this surrogate partner therapy. And the first thing you do is the 3 people meet in the therapist's office. So that's the first time I met him in person. So it's the sex therapist, myself, and the surrogate. And I had already written out my goals. And one of those goals was, I wanted to move past the church and societal dictates and family dictates. I really wanted to move past that, which I had a lot.
Oh yeah, and you were hung up on those for a long time.
Yeah, but I wanted to really get past that. I wanted to have sexual experiences and learn the basics of lovemaking. And I made my bucket list, and we went through everything on my bucket list when I was with the surrogate. And most importantly, I wanted to learn what my body was capable of erotically, because I didn't know. I really didn't know. And so that was a big part of it. I wanted to move some stagnant energy and healing at a cellular level, which it has been. Yeah. So
tell us about that, Faythe. How was it been healing at a level? You said it's been healing for you. Talk about the healing, because I think that's a very important concept to keep in mind. It's healing. Yes. How was it healing for you?
Well, first of all, you create a very safe. Well, first of all, I showed up. That was healing. I showed up. Okay, I could have said, "Oh, hell no, I'm not doing this," but I showed up, and then he created a very safe space. Over time, a very safe space, so I could trust. So that was healing, that I could be vulnerable. And I vowed from the very beginning that I would be as vulnerable as possible through this process. So being vulnerable. I think healing is about what I learned through this. One is I am worthy. I deserve pleasure. Pleasure is my birthright. I am enough, as Emily Nagoski says, I am enough. Healing my body image and say, this is enough. And I think, I'll probably cry when I say this. One of the biggest healings, I think, is coming to a place in those sessions, and maybe other people have experienced this, of learning I discovered all different parts of myself, but I also discovered myself. That place inside, you feel the tears, that place inside that is so unencumbered, that is so free, that is so not worried about anything, that it's just such a joy to be in that space. So that was incredibly healing for me.
So part of it was letting go, wasn't it? You had to let go of some things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. You have to let go of those fears and will I be enough? And will I do it right? And it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. And that I credit to both the therapist and the surrogate of creating such a safety net for me. And I talk about it as they're kind of like the Oreo cookie. They are two solid pieces on either side of me that's kind of mushing around in the middle. But they held that space for me so I could explore. And so, I would meet the surrogate on a Wednesday morning. And then the next day I would talk to the sex therapist. In between, the therapist and the surrogate would talk, would discuss whatever. So there's all communications going. I went off on your question about healing.
No, I think that's important. I think that's important for our audience to hear about healing, because healing, some people, we've been so damaged for so long, we don't even know how to start healing. And you were able to take a process and heal yourself about something that scared the hell out of you at first. And I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about, when you and I did the prelude on this, Faythe, you said you did fall in love with the surrogate in a sense, but you knew there was conscious uncoupling. Yes. Tell us how that worked.
So as we were coming towards the end of it, of course I don't want it to end, but surrogate partner therapy is not something that goes on indefinitely. Now, if somebody wanted that, they could find a sex worker probably, but this program is not structured that way. It's to replicate a relationship that you would find out in the world with the emotional piece of it, the physical piece of it. And so as we come to the end of it, we're both aware that it wasn't a surprise, okay? It wasn't like a lot of relationships that end are a surprise, very painful. And I'm not saying it wasn't painful, because I grieve over that. Now, when I say I fell in love, I've talked about whether I fell in love with him or I fell in love with the experience. And maybe it's both. I don't know. But I loved the experience. I loved what I was learning about myself. I loved talking about it with the therapist. And so when it came to the end, I said, I want to do a ceremony. I actually did two ceremonies. One was kind of in the middle, when I knew the time was coming, the session was coming, when I would no longer be a virgin. I did a ceremony and I read a poem, which at the end of today, I'd like to read that poem. And then at the end, in the conscious uncoupling, I didn't read a poem, but I did talk about that ending is not about closure. It's about completion. So we think ending just, we close it up and it's all done. No, it's just this part of it is completed, and that there's more to come. There's more experiences. Yeah. And then once we have that last session, then there is a 6-month hiatus where we do not contact each other for 6 months, which is where I'm at right now. And then after 6 months, he will not reach out to me, but I can reach out to him if I choose to do that. And he'll not to get together for the surrogate partner therapy again, but have coffee or just catch up or something like that. So
how would you describe overall the experience with you? Would you say it was amazing and a breakthrough for you?
That's probably an understatement.
Okay. Well, let's get the real statement.
Yeah. Well, I would say I was writing some things down. It's probably the most profound experience I've ever done in my life. It's certainly the greatest adventure I've ever done in my life. And I'm still learning things about myself.
Well, why was it profound? What were the things that made it profound for you?
I think because I had to give up control. I have been an independent woman for 72 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've traveled the world. I've lived in Japan for 7 years. I've lived other places. So I had to give up control. And I had to allow this safety, this cocoon, this container of safety. And my little child inside had to be talked to and said, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And so, yeah, I think just that, I don't know. I've said this to my therapist that probably most people listening to this podcast who have had sex, which most I assume have, would say, yeah, that's what sex is about. But it was so much bigger for me. I think because I waited so long and I had life experience. And as I said, most people who were younger who would talk about their first sexual experience would probably say, there's a lot of fumbling around and not knowing what we're doing. And, it wasn't so great. And I knew I wanted it to be a really healthy experience for me. And it was.
So it was life-changing for you.
Oh, absolutely. I think that I see. Okay, let me say that the story is not ended. I am still writing the story. I'm still a work in progress. And I think there's more to come. But I think I have shifted some of my thinking, some of my perspective, some of the way I think about sex, pornography, polyamory, non-monogamy, whatever words you want to put out there. Is that there's a healthy way to think about that. And I didn't realize that before.
Do you think it's brought you to be your authentic self?
I think so. I hope so. Mm-hmm. I certainly hope so.
I hear that, though. I hear you talking, and I hear you talking about being your authentic self. Now, I think one thing that's interesting, and when Faythe and I were talking, this is not just for females. In fact, many males are involved in surrogate partner therapy.
Yeah.
And she also meant something that I thought was so great and enlightening, even people that's going through transformation, or I guess you would say, a boy becoming a girl or a girl becoming a boy, they're going to be taking on a different role. This can be helpful for them and help transform them. Explain a little bit about that, Faythe, what you meant by that.
Well, as you can imagine, someone who is transitioning or who has transitioned from a boy to a girl to a boy, I can't even imagine the sexual questions and identity and turmoil that's going on. So to work with a surrogate who can help them sort this out, I think would be very helpful. Also, back to your first point there, was that I'm talking about this from my perspective as a heterosexual female, but there are a lot of males who seek out a female surrogate. In fact, there's more male clients seeking female surrogates than female clients, which is interesting. We tend to think that it's just females. It's not. There's a lot of males who have not had sex or have had very little sex who seek out help. Mm-hmm. In fact, my surrogate's wife used to do this also. She's not doing it now, but she has been a surrogate for males. So it's not just gender related. But then again, for those who are transitioning, it can be so helpful because there's so much trauma with that. Trauma. Yes. And oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
Yeah, they're very traumatized, even in so many different ways as well. And I thought that was, an important point to bring out. Now, there's going to be different listeners to my podcast. You're going to have women and men that are married to their wives or their husbands. You're going to have some that are gay, part of the LGBT community. They may be thinking, maybe they're married and they're thinking, I don't love my body. I don't appreciate who I am. The man may feel the same way. Maybe my wife and I haven't had intimacy for 5 or 6 years. Could be a health issue, but in many cases they've grown apart. And they grow apart, but the sexual intimacy needs are still there. And so you're going to have a lot of listeners from different aspects of those things I just talked about. And you're going to have gay men listen to this, and maybe they're not happy with their body or not getting fulfilled by their partner. There are going to be a lot of people listening to that. So one of the things I want to talk about, but I want to hear your poem first, and then I want to ask Faythe what her story and her journey, how her story or journey could help the different listeners on my program. But let's read your poem first.
Okay, and this I found in a book. It's a poem by John O'Donohue. John O'Donohue was an Irish poet. He died maybe 20 years ago. You can find it online. It's called For a New Beginning. For a New Beginning by John O'Donohue. And it also comes out of this book called To Bless the Space Between Us. There's a lot of poems in here, and one of them is that. It's the poem I'm going to read you. And I came across this shortly after I started working with the surrogate and thinking of the hero journey and thinking of, I'm not here to promote surrogate partner therapy. I am here to promote courage and bravery. Mm-hmm. I don't care where it is in your life. You have a call to adventure. You know you do. You hear it. And so I'm just encouraging you to reach out, step forward, and be brave and courageous. So I'm not saying you do surrogate partner therapy, but I'll get back to that in a second. So this poem, For a New Beginning, I think speaks to that, if I could just read it to you. For a New Beginning. And I hope I can get through this without crying. I don't know.
Crying is okay too, Faythe.
Okay. Okay, for a new beginning, in out-of-the-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander. This beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time, it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered, heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered, would you always live like this? Then the delight when your courage kindled, and out you stepped onto new ground, your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning that is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure. Hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will be home in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you.
Wow, that is beautiful. And that ties in so well with your story, Faythe. I think it ties in with many of our stories that we have. And it certainly ties in with my podcast on leaving fear and getting through courage. What's that?
It's your story, too.
Absolutely. And I had to use... But I think there's so many things I relate to Faythe with of having fears and apprehensions and worrying about this and worrying about that. And fear is a part of everybody's life, but courage, I believe, is stronger. It just takes us a little longer sometimes to get there. But once we use courage, we always end up being more authentic and more real to ourselves and more real to others, because I think that's a really powerful point there, and I thank you for sharing that as well. So to wrap up our podcast here, Faythe, I want you to tell us, because you're going to have a different variety of listeners on this, what you would like your story to penetrate or to influence people, because you've had a hero's journey. You've overcome a lot of fear. You've courage to get through it. Tell us what you would like to hear others draw from your example of courage.
Okay. And before I say that, I just want to go back to before I read the poem. You were talking about couples or lesbians, homosexuals. If someone is listening to this and wants to find a way to have more intimacy, I would say find yourself a really good sex therapist, someone you trust, and also someone who understands. A lot of sex therapists haven't done their own work. Let me just say that. So someone who's done their own work around this. And then you might also try to find a sexological body worker. That's not the surrogate partner that I did, but a sexological body worker. You can look that up online and just help you get in touch with your body. And you might go as a couple, you might go separately, you can go by yourself, whatever. Anyway, I just wanted to put that in there.
Yes, okay.
So in terms of what I would really like people to take away from this is that I would ask you to think of a time that you have been brave in your life. And what did that feel like? When you have been brave in your life and stepped out, what did it feel like? And then ask yourself, where do I need to be brave in my life now? And how can I do that? How can I step out in bravery and courage and answer the call to adventure? Because I can guarantee you have one. You just have to listen to it. It's there. And it might be really tiny and very soft, but something is pulling your soul. And it's all about transformation. The hero journey is about transformation. We are transforming ourselves into a higher consciousness. Mm-hmm. We're learning something about our unconscious. Mm-hmm. And becoming a different person. And that's kind of how it happens. So it's not about surrogate partner therapy. That's just the way I did it this time. But it's about overcoming the fear. And if you really step out, the energy is going to grab you and pull you along. You really don't have to worry about that, I don't think. And also to learn to love your body and to know that you are enough. You are enough. Whatever age, whatever size, whatever gender, your body is enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you are enough. Each person should say, I am enough. When I look in the mirror every morning, I say, Dan, you're a beautiful man. And as you said, I am enough. Yeah. This has been... Go ahead.
One more quote from the movie, Good Luck to You, Leo Grant. Emma Thompson, at the end of the movie, she says... it's a very powerful thing, sexual fulfillment. It makes you feel invincible. I have felt more alive and more powerful in the last month than I can ever remember. Pleasure is a wonderful thing, something we should all have. So go find some ways to incorporate pleasure in your life.
Excellent. Very well put, Faythe. It's been so powerful to have you on my podcast. And thank you for reaching out to me and sharing your story. And I want to give an email address that Faythe said I could use if anyone would like to contact her through email that may have some questions or may have some thoughts they would like to share with Faythe. Let me give the email to you, and I'll also put it in my bio when I do a write-up for this podcast that'll be coming out in the near future. It's called My Heroine, MyHeroine, My Heroine Journey, JOURNEY, @gmail.com. My Heroine Journey @gmail.com. And I'm sure Faythe would really like to hear from individuals who have listened to this podcast. And as I mentioned earlier in my podcast before, it goes out to 30 media networks throughout the different parts of the world. I've heard people from Australia. I've heard people from London that has listened to my podcast as well. So it's such a pleasure listening to you, Faythe. I am so encouraged by your story. I'm so encouraged by your bravery, and I'm so encouraged by the courage that you show to be your authentic self today. And I want you to have a beautiful life, and I think you've already started to have a beautiful life because you experience things in your life now recently that you hadn't before, and you are a valuable human being. And I love this podcast with you. Thank you, Faythe, for being on my podcast with me.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And as I said to you before we started, this is my coming out party.
Yes.
So thank you for the coming out party.
Yes. We all have one. It just comes out in different levels and different ways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Faythe. It's been a great experience.
Thank you.
You take care now. Bye-bye.